welcome to another edition of Around the Farm. I'm Andy Hite, and with me is infamous Jim. Good to meet you, Jim. And we have really changed venues because tonight we are around the farm. This weekend has been our History Alive at Johnston Farm, and for those of you that didn't come out, you've missed a great weekend of events. We've been fortunate. We have two wonderful scholars, Karen Varanch and Doug Wood, with us, and they have been doing and are going to present tonight living history presentations of Doug Woods portrays Cherokee Chief Man Killer Ostinaco. Thank you.
That's quite all right.
And Karen Varanch does the story of Mary Draper Ingalls, who was captured by the Shawnee, spent some time in captivity, and she also tells the story of her escape and her journey back to her home. This is a chance when you do live in history like this. This is as close as you'll ever really get to being with that person.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is really very close to real history. This is not, so. This is not, sitting on the fence. This is real history.
And it was great last night. We've had some wonderful entertainment. We've got we got the Errant Sisters tonight who are doing bluegrass music for us. We had Peaceful Strings with dulcimer music last night. It's just been a lot of fun. I think the people last night enjoyed it. We had some excellent questions from the audience, because one of the things that the scholars do when they finish their set presentation, then they stop and they take questions as the historical figure. Then after that they break character and take questions as a scholar. Right. And you never know what somebody's going to ask.
Oh, no. And this afternoon we had a great presentation on how to do a historical character, how to literally plan for that, put it all together, and they did a wonderful job.
Oh, yeah, they did. And it was interesting, too, because a lot of our staff and volunteers were there, so they're all sitting there in their costumes, and it has to have been a great picture to see, that going on as well. Sure. And we were able to use our new education center.
Absolutely. It was great. And Andy and I were in costume. He was as the site manager of a historical area. I was as a librarian. It was great.
Yeah, and nobody questioned our costumes.
No.
It was a wonderful.
They were accurate.
Yes, they were dead on right.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. It was good use of that room, which is exactly what we. Well, sure. one of the purposes that we created that room for. So I think we'll let people see. I think they'll enjoy this tonight. We're going to do more of these kind of programs. I think we've got the venue that we can do that.
Right.
We're under a tent tonight. We've got Susie's Big Dipper here serving food. It's a great evening.
Oh, Andy, and I have been very impressed. He has scheduled the weather perfectly. We had a nice night last night. It looks like we're going to have a beautiful night tonight. Congratulations on a job well done with the weather.
Sometimes a blind hog finds an acorn. So you
I was afraid of what you were going to say on that one.
I know. You were scared what road I was going to go down, weren't you?
I was.
I almost did too. And Joe would have.
Just kind of bleep this out.
So I think people will enjoy this. This is another one of our series of programs. Our next event coming up, we'll do this now because we won't want to stop. We want to do this after the people have performed. On August the 16th, we do our evening on the canal.
Right.
And that's always fun because we start with a dinner in the new Education Center.
There we go.
That's air conditioned and close to real restrooms. I don't know what else you can ask for. And this year...
Is it true? You are going to walk on water?
No.
Oh.
Only if I fall off and have to run really fast. But
come to see that.
This year's program, because we try to rotate the programs we do on the canal boat, and I know Marlo's already talked to you about being involved in this.
Yes.
This year is really going to be interesting because there really isn't a script, there really isn't a set program, but what we have is a lot of folks like Jim who just create a canal character and will interact with the passengers. I think it really gives people a pretty good feel for what it might have been like on the canal. Mm-hmm. We haven't done this program. It's been a long time since we did this one. And I thought, you know what, this would be a good year to bring that one back. It's a lot of fun.
We'll see.
Well, I think it's a lot.
And it's a captive audience. Once you're on,
right.
You can't get off. So,
And you know, we remind people of that as you know, you've had dinner, now you get a show and you can't go anyplace. So what a deal, you know?
Yeah, can't beat that.
So you know, that'll be coming up in August. That'll be August the 16th. That is a reservation event. We know that about 50 people is the most that we can have that's comfortable for the boat and for the cast of thousands to be able to operate and do their thing. Then our next event will be in October, where we do our celebration of fall, where we hay rides, all sorts of fall events. We might, don't know for sure yet, looking at doing some of the things that people would see in the fall. I've had an offer of people that may either butcher a deer or a hog that day.
Oh, wow.
Which would have, you know, in October, that would have been,
That's right.
That would have been the time that would have been happening. And if we do that, and like I said, that's an if right now, but you know, that's just one more aspect of what was going on out here, because I think sometimes people forget that this was a family home.
Right.
You know, they're going to do
an
operating farm, and they're going to do the things that a family would do. Hogs were one of Johnston's principal crops, so you would have had hogs being butchered. So that would be a great, I think people probably don't see that. They think pork comes in that styrofoam package with plastic wrap around it.
It doesn't?
Well, it does, but that's not where it comes from.
I always thought that's where it came from. I'll learn something.
There you go.
Wow.
See, you come to the Johnston Farm and you never know what you're gonna go away with. So anyway, and then of course at Christmas time we'll be doing the first weekend in December, the first Saturday. I think it's the 6th. This is the date this year, if I remember right. We'll be doing our Christmas on the farm, and this year we're going to kill Scrooge again.
Yep. We keep.
And he keeps coming back.
Yeah,
darndest thing, you know, it's hard to figure. But anyway, tonight we're going to go back in time, and one of the things that you'll see the scholars will talk about Virginia. And at the time we're starting in 1758. And in 1758, this was a part of the biggest English-speaking county in the world. This was Augusta County. So we were, our ancestors that were here were Virginians. So, you know,
whether they wanted to be or not, they were.
And also I suppose we should throw in, they were also subjects of George II. They were British subjects at this point in time. So that kind of gives you a place on where they are. I think you'll enjoy the performance tonight, because like Jim said, this is really as close as you can get to seeing these figures, you know, in time.
Right. So it'll be a great show. Hope you all enjoy it.
And we'll see you next month when we go around the farm.
Osio yunali. Tohitso. Stada yonegitsi woni. Ule nu asehi tadi yostataki hikunage astutsiki. I give you a blessing, and I tell you I speak English very well. I would like to thank my Shawnee escort for escorting me through Shawnee land. Brothers and sisters, you look well. I am surprised because you are so far west from Ohio River. You are in the French hunting grounds here. If you did not look so well, I would say you have been in the hands of your enemies and our enemies. But you look too well for that. Sister, it's good to see you.
My hands are wet.
That's all right, sister. My hands have been wet before. It's good to see you, sister. Mother, it's good to see you. Brother, it's good to see you. Little sister, you look well.
Thank you.
Have you been traveling long?
Not really.
Not really. And you, brother, it's good to see you. You look well. Brother, it's good to see you.
You as well.
Father, it's good to see you. Good to see you, Mother. It's good to see all of you. I would shake all your hands, but time is of the essence. By your dress, and by your appearance, I would say that you are Virginians from the backwoods west of the Great Blue Ridge, perhaps as far west as the Allegheny Mountains. Is that true? You don't know if you're Virginians. You are here in Augusta County, the largest English-speaking county in the world. It stretches from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. Are you therefore not Virginians? Yes, you know you are Virginian. Perhaps I am the first to bring you the good news, Virginians. Our enemies will soon be beaten. The French have all but abandoned Fort Duquesne. Our warriors have rid the woods of enemy engines, so the army of your great warrior general, John Forbes, now plans its march to the forks of Ohio River without concern for the enemy. To those of you who lost family and property to the enemy, I offer you my heartfelt sorrow. Brothers and sisters, take heart in this news that I bring you. You may soon return to your plantations and work your fields in safety. I have a pass, a certificate of safe passage. I'm returning from fighting against the French in their hunting grounds. Here's my pass. I know the script, but I cannot read the English words. Is there one amongst you who can read? Brother, you can read.
Yes, I can read.
Would you do me this service?
Sure.
Your father has seen to your education.
Yes, so aloud?
Can you read very loud?
Yes.
And you don't mind? Could you stand up and face the crowd?
Sure, sure.
Thank you, brother. And if you have trouble, I'll help you out.
Okay. No, all by these presents that the bearer of this pass.
He's come to my name, and it is handwritten. Let me help you with that. Most of my Chalagi brethren call me Astyatihi Astanaika. My English brethren call me Altasti Ostinako. And you, my little brother, may simply address me as Ostinako.
Okay. Ostinako is granted safe passage through the realm of His Most Britannic Majesty.
That's His Britannic Majesty.
Britannic Majesty George II, by the grace of God, defender of the faith and
etc.
etc. Yes. For the purposes herein stated, to manage the.
You're doing well, but it's hard to read his handwriting. It's to range the woods.
Virginia and
Carolina.
Carolina.
Yes, brother, doing well.
The bearer's person are these items severed.
He's come to the blurry spot where the blood of an enemy has spilt upon the pass. Several long arms.
And
Rifled guns.
rifled guns of
A Pennsylvania youth.
Pennsylvania.
Speaks High Dutch. Honest to goodness, folks, he has come to the blood-stained portion of the... I will show it. You will see it later. You're doing very well.
Authorized by His Majesty's sole agent for the Southern Indian Department, Right Honorable Edmund Atkin, Espanol,
Esquire. I'm impressed.
Attested to hereby
Captain Raymond Desmarais. He is the commandant at Fort Loudon in Tennessee.
Thank you. Delivered this 27th day of March, 1758. God
Save the king!
yeah.
Now, with the help of my little brother. Very impressive. On the count of three, we will say the last words.
Okay.
1, 2, 3. God save the king! Very good. Thank you, my little brother. The Pennsylvania youth mentioned in the past, we have returned to the authorities in that colony. I trust that they will find the remnants of his family and return him there too. The rest of the warriors in my gang are encamped less than half a league to the westward from here. I had hoped to shoot a deer, perhaps a turkey, for our evening meal, but speaking with you, my English brothers and sisters, is a pleasure I will not forgo. We shall eat tomorrow. When I was a boy, my mother taught me many important things I have not forgotten. She advised me to always listen to wa, ya, our clan leader. She told me, well, yeah, Wolf will always. Our chosen leaders fail to do so. For two-legged people like yourselves, like myself, we may falter, become confused. But Wolf is my elder brother, indeed, Wolf is my grandfather, and he sits in the council of all the first beings. I have always listened to him whenever he's come to me to help me. Many years your governors asked us to make peace with the Six Nations and other northern Indians, and this we have attended to with some success. But the French of late have lured away many Anisamonugi, the Shawanoes. The French have lured them away from our English king, so when your governor Dinwiddie asked us to consider taking up our hatchets against our traditional enemies, I was glad to speak on behalf of the call to arms in our councils. You see, brothers and sisters, when I first heard the words of Governor Dinwiddie, I had a strong dream. I had this dream several nights. Have any of you ever had a dream return to you more than once? Do any of you speak English? Let your tongues loosen, and we will have a conversation. Have any of you ever had a dream return to you more than once? Yes. These are your ancestors speaking to you. Wolf came to me numerous times. He warned me of the trickery of the French. He advised me that if we would stand fast with our English king, we would gain a decisive victory and we would be blessed for many years. At Ichalti, my nation's principal town, as well as at Kawahiyi, the head town of the Lower Chalagi, councils were held for many days. I was glad to answer the call to arms. I fully understand the treachery of the French foxes. They intend only to conquer us and to pay us low prices for our deer skins. In the memory of my people, your English goods have always been of better quality. The prices our deer skins have brought with your traders have always been better than the prices with the French traders. Your English kings have given us many good presents. So when most of the councils decided for war, I proposed a bold stroke against the Shawanoe in the winter that followed the defeat of your English army at the French fort at the forks of Ohio River, Fort Duquesne. Our warriors would move swiftly down Sandy Creek on foot and by canoe. We would attack the Shawanoe towns on Ohio and Sonioto rivers. We knew many of their warriors were with the French in their forts at Duquesne and in the Illinois country and at the Alabama's fort. We knew this would weaken the defenses at Sonioto. We sent wampum belts to our middle towns and our lower towns, and I recruited 130 warriors, and we intended for the Shawanoe towns. Your governor, Dinwiddie, he ordered Major Lewis to form an army and join us in our campaign. And so, 3 winters ago, in 1756, the two armies gathered at Fort Frederick on the Dunkert's bottom of New River. Several nights' travel to the southeastward from here. Although there were veterans in my army, veterans of the previous war, many of my young warriors had not fought alongside Englishmen before. This led to some misunderstandings, but in the first days of the campaign, we enjoyed the company of your soldiers. I found Major Lewis to be an able commander. He always listened to our advice whenever we held a council of war. That is the place in which I met 2 men from Virginia, William Ingalls and Johnny Draper. Those men told me that they had come to some of our headmen in our overhills villages. For in the summer of 1755, William's family was taken, and Johnny's family was taken by the Shawanoe. They asked our headmen if we would consider assisting them, and the headmen said that they would send emissaries to the Shawanoe first and attempt to obtain their family members back in a peaceful manner. And if that did not work, then our young warriors would be instructed to lead a campaign and to rescue the family members. Before we could effect a change, the Ingalls woman escaped her captors, and she returned to her home. I told Will on the campaign, I told him that his woman was strong. She would bear him many more children, and they would comfort him in his old age. Now, at Fort Frederick, we warriors had gathered and we danced our war dance. We sang our war songs. And a few Virginians, like Johnny Draper and others, they sang their deeds of valor in the last war. That is the war in which I earned my rank. You heard him attempt to read. Askyat Dehi, man killer. It is the second highest rank we warriors can attain. The first, Askyat Gunsta. You English say great warrior. Augunstote is one of the few men in my generation who has earned that rank. And I do aspire to it. And with the help of Wolf and the great being above, I may yet attain that rank in this present war. You see, brothers and sisters, although I am healthy, I am no longer a young warrior. Over 50 winters have passed since my mother gave birth to me. My mother is my inspiration. Despite her advanced age, she can still carry a bundle of 20 deer skins 3 leagues in one day. And at the end of that day, she will kindle a fire and cook a good soup of corn mush and bear meat for her favorite son. I will always protect her and all our women and children as long as I draw breath. After we danced and sang at Fort Frederick, we moved out 340 strong, with some Chalagi and some Virginians serving as scouts out ahead of the main force. We crossed the mountains to Holston and Clinch Rivers, and then we dropped off the Stony Ridge onto Sandy Creek. That windy moon was an unusually wet moon. We had to cross streams swollen by winter rains numerous times as we went down Sandy Creek. When we came to the great cane brake, the horses fed well on the cane that grew there, but we did not stay long enough for them to satisfy their hunger. We followed the main road through the low gap westward of the cane brake, and we came to a branch of Sandy Creek. There, our scouts found a bear hunting camp of the enemy. The hunters we tracked had been killing bears to render fat. The land along Sandy Creek is full of bears. Indeed, there are so many bears there, people of several nations conduct our winter hunts there. We even run across the Shawanoes when we are hunting in that region in the wintertime. Have any of you men ever hunted sleeping bears? Surely you are new settlers amongst these mountains. How have you survived this far? I cannot reckon. I can tell you how to do this later if you wish, but now I want to tell you more of the war. We found many signs of the enemy on that branch going to war, especially moccasin prints and fresh horse tracks where they had been thieving horses from your Virginias. Many of the men continue to call that branch War Creek to this day because of the warrior camp and warrior signs that we found there. Now, brothers and sisters, we came to the forks of Sandy Creek, and there we Chalagi commenced building canoes out of the bark of the great elm trees that grow there. The journey from our towns on Tennessee River to Ohio River by way of Sandy Creek is usually reckoned at 7 days travel, 4 overland, and 3 by canoe. Had we not had the Virginians, or I should say your fine Virginian army with us, we could have easily been to the Shawanoe towns in the time it took our combined force to reach the Sandy Creek Forks. Major Lewis, smart man, he convinced his men to work on canoes, build more, and they built canoes of the dugout variety. Those canoes were not waterworthy in the high water below the forks of Sandy Creek. They all capsized. Much of the remaining food and ammunition were lost, while the horses still carried food. Those few who were left alive, for many had starved to death. The way was rough. The pack train was required to climb steep mountains numerous times. Sandy Creek below the forks could not be passed. In many places the water ran against the cliffs of the mountains. There was no footing for the horses along the way. Many of the soldiers stood against the orders of their officers to proceed. One company in its entirety returned home against orders. It was a bad time. Starvation was in the men's faces. Major Lewis saw the dying horses, the poor food stock, the mutinous behavior of the men, and he decided it was time to return home. He asked me if we would return with him to Williamsburg to discuss the war effort with the head men there. I agreed to do so. My gang of 50 warriors accompanied us. Those of us who returned with Major Lewis fared well. We ate the remaining horses. We killed a number of bears along the way. But later in Williamsburg, I heard of the men who returned against the orders of their officers. They did not fare so well. They returned by way of the North Fork of Sandy Creek, where they were forced to boil their rawhide tugs to make soup, to drink, just to stay alive. You can see, you know, brother, you can see what poor nourishment such fare would provide hungry men. Please pass that along. Many of those soldiers, even today, I've met with them, and they still refer to that fork of Sandy Creek as the tug fork, because they were forced to boil their tugs there. We went to Williamsburg. And then Governor Dinwiddie agreed with our plan to establish a fort amongst us, so that our women and children would have a place to be safe when the enemy came amongst us while we were out on campaign. We warriors. And so my gang escorted the Virginia soldiers to Ichalte, my nation's principal town I told you of earlier. It is like your town of Williamsburg. It is the capital of our nation. So we were escorting Lewis, and we came to some other towns on the way back, and in each town we made a speech. And then when we came to Ichalte, our headman, our governor, Kanehuati, he and the Takunkala little carpenter, they asked if we had been poorly treated by you Virginians, as had some of our brother warriors. But I told them we'd never been so well used in any parts as we had been in Virginia. Not only the governor and the great men made us presents, gifts, but the people in general was kind and showed us respect as you show me here today. I told the rest of the people gathered there at Ichalte, and I had to speak with my hands, for there were many in the back, old people who could not hear. I could spend my blood for my brothers, the Virginians, and I am sure if you were all as well acquainted with my brothers, you would spend your blood for them too. Brothers and sisters, my effort bore fruit for the war. We assisted in the war season last spring. Hundreds of Chalegee went to the Roanoke, the James, the New, and the Potomac rivers. We operated most often out of the forts on the Potomac. Cumberland Fort on the north branch of that river, Pearsall's Fort on the south branch, and Loudon Fort at Winchester. We brought back scalps of the enemy engines. We brought back French officers and their orders that we had captured on campaign, and we gave those orders and turned over most of the prisoners to the Virginia authorities so that you could plan, they could plan the next step against the enemy. Brothers and sisters, I am very proud to say that I continued to recruit. And in the spring of this year, over 500 Chalegee went to the Potomac forts. Perhaps 200 or so down Tennessee River to the Ohio to defeat the French in their hunting grounds along the Ohio and the Mississippi. Augen Stolta and myself, we led our men to the Ohio River. We came northward all along the Ohio on both banks of the river. And we went to Fort Duquesne, and we went beyond Fort Duquesne, and we went towards the lake that you call Erie. On our way back from our campaign, we went by Duquesne once again. We found the garrison to be quite small, only women and children and young people in the engine towns thereabouts. This made us ponder, perhaps the warriors have gone home, or perhaps they had gone southward to attack our towns and kill our old men and take our women and children captive. This is why we return home now, to defend our families and our towns against the enemy. If the great being above favors me, I intend to visit King George and tell him what an honor it is to serve him in this war and the last. I want to thank him for the kindness that he has shown us over the years. Without the trade that he encourages between you, his white children, and us, his red children, we would be a poor people indeed. The great king will be glad to hear me testify to the brightness of the ancient covenant chain that links us two peoples together. Well, I know the passage to England is dangerous and I am old, but I hope to do this thing before I die. Have any of you ever been to England? Someone has been to England. Could you tell me something that I should know for when I travel there to see the king?
His house is probably bigger than what you're expecting.
Bigger than the governor's mansion in Williamsburg?
Yes.
Whoa. Anything else? Anybody else has been there or come lately from there? You have been, and you young lady? You have? Could you offer advice for me? being that you are a woman and I respect your opinion.
Thank you. It's rainy there a lot, not much sunshine sometimes. So take your rain gear.
Rain gear? I'll take my wool blanket. Thank you. You Virginians and we Chalagi, we hold on to the ends of that covenant chain that I told you of. It binds us in mutual love and respect, and soon with the defeat of our mutual enemies, we will stand at the door of the great council house, not quite as large as the king's house, but we will stand at the door of that council house and we will make new treaties to benefit both our peoples. And now, is there anything you would ask of me to help you better understand your Chalagi brethren and sisters, or perhaps you are eager to learn more news of your plantations here west of the Allegheny Mountains and Ohio River? This land has supported my enemies and sometimes my own hunting parties for many years, longer than I can remember. Is there any question you would ask of this land or of my people, or any other question? Yes, sister.
Where is your home?
It is in Tomotley. It is a town on Tennessee River. Have you ever heard of the Tennessee River? It is to the south. And for those of you who don't know, it's to the south and slightly west from here. A long journey for you English people, not as long for me, for I am used to the travel. Other questions? Yes, brother.
How did Mankiller learn to speak English so fluently?
Mankiller has been trading with the English since I was a boy. We had our first encounter with a headman from England in 1730. And the Takokalu, the man that I mentioned, the little carpenter, he traveled to England at that time. And we had a treaty, the very first treaty that we have ever had with the King of England. And from that time forward, we have had your traders amongst us in great number. And they have taught me to speak in the English language. Sometimes with a dialect, a Scottish dialect, they say. Other questions? Yes, brother.
How far north did your people settle and have towns?
Our permanent towns are no further north than, a little further north than my town, along Tennessee River. We're in the place that the traders call the Overhills towns. And we have, our furthest north town is just a wee bit north from Ichalti. And I must tell you, brothers and sisters, I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about my mother. My mother expected me as a child and told me every day that I must get up out of my bed and go down to the water and bathe. And I did this in every season of the year, even the bitterest cold winter moons. Sometimes I had to chop through the ice to get in. And I wanted to know from these young lads here, well, perhaps not that one. Does your mother require this of you? To swim in the stream every morning? No. You? No. And so you English are not fit for winter campaign. Keep this in mind. I have been toughened for the life of a hunter and a warrior by my mother. Are there other questions? Yes, brother.
How many children have you?
7 children. 7 children. My wife and I have 7 children. But you know, you understand they are in her clan and not in my clan. Our ways are slightly different than the English, or perhaps I should say greatly different, but not so great that we cannot overcome those differences. But whereas you men give your name to the children, your last name goes to your children, our children belong to the clan of their mothers. So I am actually much closer to my nephews than I am to my own sons in some ways. I had to teach my nephews how to be Chalagi men, my sister's children. I had to teach them how to be Chalagi men. But I cannot teach my own children because they are not in my clan. There are different ways amongst us. Are there other questions? Yes, sister.
How many siblings do you have, brothers and sisters?
Yes, 8. 8, and I am the youngest, as you probably heard me allude to earlier, speaking of my mother. And yes, brother.
Do you ever encounter the Spanish to your south?
Oh, yes. Yes, we have sometimes traded with the Spanish. In my opinion, this is usually a bad experience. But some of our headmen have been talking about going to the Spaniards and obtaining more firearms and more powder and lead. There have been difficulties, shall I say, between us getting supplies so that we could fight the war on your behalf. And I would appreciate it if any of you are captains or headmen in any way, shape, or form that you would tell the governor when you go back to Williamsburg that this issue has not been resolved on the frontier zone. Yes, brother.
Were the black men that you encountered on the plantations of the English that you were protecting considered your friends or your foes?
They are our friends if they are English speakers, because they are our allies. But brother, we have many of the black or brown people residing amongst us, and we have adopted many who have run away from plantations amongst the Spaniards. And so color of the skin makes no difference. What matters is if a child is willing to do what he is asked to do by his mother, or she is willing to do what she is asked to do by her mother. And if the child is willing to learn to speak, and if an adult is willing to learn to speak our language and to learn our ways, then that person, no matter the color of skin, is welcome amongst us. Brother.
How do you travel? Walk or
Walk and canoe. We have seen many of the officers on campaigns riding on horses, but they have had great difficulties. Oftentimes the horses have been put down because their hooves were split and infected. It is difficult to find a place to feed the horses, especially in places like on the Sandy Creek campaign. Very rugged terrain, very few grasslands. And so a horse is pretty good for a pack animal, but not so good to ride. And so I have never ridden a horse. I have always walked. Yes, sister.
How are you related to the Cherokee, or how you associate?
Chalagi, yes, that is how we over hills say our name. Ani Chalagi.
Okay.
Yes. You were probably referring to the lower towns or the middle towns. They say Cherokee. Cherokee. It is not our word. It's not our ancient word. It is borrowed from someone, but we say Chalagi. Cherokee. Cherokee. Other questions? All right. Brothers and sisters, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you are now spellbound. It's good to be here. Be safe. I would suggest you scrounge up a few weapons before you continue on your journey.
Have your attention one more time. We're going to have one more for us. She is going to amaze you.
Scared of him.
Her voice, her gestures, her dance movements, they are wonderful. But before that, we're going to have to kind of go downhill a little bit, and I'm going to have to introduce to you someone that I've known for years upon years. I knew him when he was just a little pup. And now, he's a big dog. I bring to you the site manager of the Johnston Farm and Indian Agency, Andy Hite. On behalf of all of our staff and volunteers, we really want to thank you for being here tonight. It's rewarding for us and for the scholars to see a group like this. The questions have been good. We're glad that you're enjoying this. We do want to mention, though, that this wouldn't have been possible tonight without some help of some very important sponsors. The Miami County Foundation played a key role in this tonight. La Quinta Inn, they'll attest to that. They had someplace to sleep for 2 nights. They appreciated that. The Johnston Farm Friends Council has supported this. And we also had some support from maybe a strange place, but the Swing Era Band provided some help for us as well. So if you see any of those people or if you're in any of those places, please thank them so that they know that you enjoyed yourself and you had a good time and their support was well worth it. You know, and again, we're just glad you're here. You know, this is as close as you'll ever get to these sort of historical characters.
These folks have spent untold time researching. They'll tell you that it takes about a year or better to get a character ready. So there's a lot of work that goes into this. This is real history. It's not fictional history. It's not made up history. This is as close as you can come to see these figures actually come off the page and come alive. That's why we call this History Alive at the Johnston Farm. And so again, we're glad you're here. We hope you enjoy it. And Mary, you're probably ready to go.
I'm going to start dancing any minute.
All right, all right. That wasn't in last night's program.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I do want to say, and we're going to get you up there just 2 seconds.
That's a big step.
I told you if we had 4 more weeks, I'd be talking for 4 hours. Now, after this is over,
doing it. He is.
I know. Who are you? Now, when we finish this, ooh, that was my wife giving me that burn. Now,
You have the
after we
paperwork
finish
I
all
told
of
you
this,
last night.
we've had the questions in character. We're going to bring them back up, and they're going to do questions out of character. So if you want to ask them about something about how they do what they do, that's the time to do it. So without further ado, the most historic lady here from the 1790s, Mary Draper Ingalls, is going to talk to us tonight. You're up there.
Thank you.
All right.
Now, folks, I used to dance when I was a young girl, but I don't believe I'm going to be doing a dance. Unless you want to start playing on your fiddle, honey, I might give a little bit of clog step here. Now, we got things to talk about. Well, good evening. My name is Mary Draper Ingalls, and I was captured by Indians, but that was nigh under 40 years ago, back when I was a young woman living here in Draper's Meadow. Well, let me tell you how I come to be living out here on the western frontier of Virginia. My family come from Philadelphia and was living in Stanton when my daddy heard tell there was land for the taking. Didn't need no cash money, just rolled your sleeves up and worked you out a home place. Didn't have no cash, but we was willing to work. So one fall, my daddy and some other fellers went on out west to the western mountains, and he staked out a piece of land. When he come home, he said he found a real purty spot not far from New River. I'm gonna call it Draper's Meadow, he said. He said to lay claim to that land, he did what's called Tommyhawk rights. He notched out the trees around the edge of the property, indicating that was his property. We all went along, we got ourselves prepared, organizing the things we was gonna take. But one day my daddy went hunting, and he didn't never come home. Folks thought for certain Indians got him, but my mama, she thought different. You see, my daddy, George Draper, he had been the sheriff there of Stanton, Virginia, and he tried something that weren't too popular. He tried enforcing the law. And Mama thought for certain it was some of them fellers he locked up went after him, but we had no way to prove it. Well, the following fall and spring, all the other families, the Ingalls and the Harmons and the Lennards were all headed out west, and Mama said we had land there too, and we's going too. So me and my brother John and my mama, we went with them other families, and we followed out over the mountains. Now, I know you have an idea that we ride in them fancy wagons, but in the 1740s, it weren't that way at all. Everyone had to come west, had to walk. We couldn't afford us no wagon. Besides, the path was so narrow, a wagon wouldn't fit. We walked one behind each other with our horse, carrying everything we could bring out here with us. But when we got here, we saw that my daddy had been right. Draper's Meadow was a real purty spot. We set to work straight away, making it a home place. Now, the most important thing we had to do straight away was get our corn planted. You see, however much land we cleared and corn we planted, that was our home place. You could have an extra half acre for a house and house garden, but the rest of it had to be corn. It was called planting corn rights. I know my daddy had them Tommyhawk rights in the trees, but we wanted good, free claim to our land, and corn rights was the best way to do it. So we started clearing the land and planting our corn. But corn was important for another reason. You see, once the winter snow comes, we'd be stranded back in that home place. Oh, you dasn't go too far. Look at hunting for food. Food's always hibernating anyways in the wintertime. But if you went out in the snow and you got turned around, why, you might freeze to death not 500 yards from your front door. So you had to stay real close to home. And you could put corn up and you could eat corn all winter long. We could parch the corn, we could dry it. We ate a lot of corn. We ate cornbread, we ate corn pone, we ate corn fritters, we ate corn muffins. By April, we were real tired of eating corn. So you see, corn was the most important thing we had to do. We had to claim our land and we had to feed ourselves through the first winter, through all the winters actually. So the corn was important. It was more important than get us a fine house built. Oh, we got a shelter built straight away, of course, because we had to get out of the snow and the wind and the rain. But the first house we had, well, it weren't very nice at all. It didn't have a floor, didn't have a window. It didn't even have a proper fireplace. Just one fashioned from mud and clay from down by the riverbank. Wattle and daub, we called that. But after a couple of years, we did get us a fine house built. Had a window you can open and close, and a fireplace fashioned from a fieldstone. Of course, to build the second house, we had to burn down the first one. Why, we had left Bedford County with 20 nails. 20 nails! That made us wealthy on the frontier. It ain't no way to get metal work done out in these parts. To make sure we had used every single one of them nails a second time, we burnt down the first house and sifted through the ashes, making sure we had all the metal. Everybody does it that way. If you're leaving out and going to Kentucky country or Tennessee country, last thing you do before you leave is burn your house down. It's a good way to do some house cleaning too, I expect. Well, I growed up out here in the frontier. And after a while, I got married to a young feller living over on New River by the name of William Ingalls. Mine was the first Christian wedding west of the Allegheny Mountains. We was real happy living out here together. Soon we had a couple of youngins. Tommy, he was our oldest, and then Georgie. And then my brother John, he went back east and met that girl named Betty Robertson. And they got married and they come out, they had a baby. And we was happy out here. It was hard work, don't get me wrong. But then we began to hear about the Indian trouble all through Western Virginia. Oh, the Indians come through here aforehand. Cherokee from the south, Delaware and Shawnee and Wyandot from the north. They come through with their faces painted and feathers on the head, and sometimes through their noses. Took you a little while to get that one, didn't you? They never caused us much trouble, though. Now, they weren't right friendly, but they might trade for some coffee or from flour, such as that. But they didn't start causing trouble until them red-coated Englishmen and them Frenchmen started in over warring over who owned this here territory. That's what really stirred up the Indian trouble out here in the frontier. Well, we heard about that great battle on the Monongahela River. That red-coated General Braddock marched in 10,000 British troops, and the French and Indians soundly defeated them. Braddock himself was killed, and his young lieutenant had to take command. His name was George Washington. Washington was soundly defeated himself, and he had to take them troops back east in total disgrace and defeat. After Washington was defeated, well, the Indians went on the warpath all through Western Virginia. Now, my husband and my brother thought we should go over to McCorkle's place. They's just a family. They didn't have a proper fort or nothing, but it was a fortified home place. We thought we could fort up there for a spell. But this was July. Corn was just about ready to come in out of the field. And if we let that corn rot out in the field, we wouldn't have nothing to eat all winter long. And we'd be stranded in that fort. And you know, when a whole lot of people come in together to one place, it gets to be mighty crowded through the winter time. So we didn't want to have to go there without food. I guess we waited a few days too long. It was a hot day in July. I was to home with my young'uns. Georgie was 4 and Tommy, he was just 2. Betty was nursing her baby and Mama was sitting there too. Colonel Patton was visiting us. And all of a sudden, the menfolk, they were up in the cornfield. And then, in the Draper's Meadow come them Shawnee Indians, a whooping and a hollering and a carrying on. They killed my mother. They killed Colonel Patton. Betty, she scooped up her baby and she took off running for the woods. And they took deadly aim and they shot her arm so that she dropped her baby. And they picked up her baby and they bashed out his brains. Then they took me and my 2 little boys, and Mary, and Betty, and every horse we had on the place. And we started following out along New River, moving fast, moving real fast. I knowed even if William and John was still alive, they couldn't follow out behind us. They wouldn't have no horses. Next, we stopped at Casper Barger's place. Old man living there by himself. They cut his head off, put it in a bag. Go on down the river to old Miss Liebrook's house and give her the bag, a-laughing how it'd be when she opened it up and saw what was inside of it. And then we went on to Henry Lennard's place, and they captured Henry Lennard. I couldn't understand why they didn't kill him like they did the other men folk. And I found out what it was all about. You see, that Indian hunting party had lost 2 braves in battle with white folk. So by their way of reckoning, 2 white folk had to die, 2 white men had to die. They killed Colonel Patton at our house, and they killed Casper Barger. They didn't need to kill Henry Lennard. They just took him prisoner. And now we started, moving fast, up over Flat Top Mountain, back down to New River. I don't know how long we went. It was a long time, it seemed. I kept holding my baby, saying, be ever so quiet. Do whatever the Shawnee tell you to do, for I always hear tell that once they captured you, they took you back to their tribe. You cause them trouble on the trail, they'll do away with you as soon as fool with your nonsense. I knew that to be a fact. I don't know, it must have been 8, 10 hours. Betty was in so much trouble where her arm had been shot, but they were making her walk. Finally, we stopped for a rest. And they let me go off in the woods and get some sticks and some mud so I could set her arm so she'd have use of it in year to come. When I was patching up her arm, one of them Indians come back with a great big old handfuls of spider webs, indicating I should put it on the wound. I ain't never heard tell of that before, I thought to myself, but I weren't about to argue with them. And you know, I believe it did help some. It did help to heal that wound all the better. But then we headed out again, moving fast. Finally, we come to where the New River and the Gauley come together to form the Kanawha. And we stopped for the night. I thought we was going to get some much-deserved rest there, but they didn't. They worked us all night long. There's a salt lick there. The animals come to eat the salt of a night. And they had us working all night long, digging up salt and boiling it down to take back with us to the Indian village. Next day, we loaded back up on the horses and head up along the Kanawha River. Finally, we crossed that great river they call the Ohio. Now we's in Shawnee country. Something else happened while we headed north. You see, when I was captured, I was 8 months with child. And after coming into Shawnee country and traveling for a couple of weeks, I realized that my time had come. And I had to go off in the woods by myself and give birth. Well, Betty, she weren't allowed to go with me. Her job was to look after my 2-year-old. They made it right clear that a woman's work was to look after the babies. That was not their job. And I had to go off by myself. My first 2 births were right easy, and this one was too. She was a little girl. I prayed she'd be a good girl, and they wouldn't do away with her like they done Betty's. She was a good baby. Next day, we loaded her back up on the horses and headed out again. I don't recollect how long exactly, but about a day or so after, some of them Indian braves took out ahead of us, and I knowed we must be near to Shawnee town. We come over a crest of that hill. I shall never forget the sight that I saw. Must have been near 500 Shawnees a-waiting for us, each with big, stout sticks in their hands, hollering things like, "Come on, we're ready for you." And then they lined up in 2 long lines. And I found out what was about to happen. They's going to make us run the gauntlet. Betty was first. She had to run straight down through them 2 lines of Indians, each one beating her with sticks and thorn bushes and such as she went by. I was screaming, "Betty, run! Run for your life!" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But I found out what it was all about later. You see, the Shawnee, they are right proudful people. They believe that they are the best people in all the land. But they will adopt you into their tribe, into their heart and home. But you have got to prove you're good enough to be a Shawnee first. If you can make it through an ordeal such as the gauntlet, it ain't a torture device. It's a way to see if you can make it past people beating on you with sticks and such as that and make it to the wiggy-wah there at the end of the line. If you can do that, they figure you're brave enough one day you could be a Shawnee. But you break down a whimpering and a sniveling and a crying, well, they figure you ain't worth fooling with at all, and they just beat you to death right then and there. Betty, she made it. Even with her arm all bound up, she did. And then Henry Leonard was next. And I seen something I hadn't seen before. That when Betty ran the gauntlet, it was just women folk and children. But when Henry ran it, all the men folk got in line too. And I found out what that meant. See, to a Shawnee brave, it's beneath his dignity to ever hit a woman. Even a captive woman such as us, a man would never raise his hand to a woman. And so when Betty ran, the men folk didn't get in line, but when Henry got in the line, well, they wanted to take their licks at him, see if they could make him fall. But Henry didn't fall. He made it to the end. And I thought for certain I was going to be next. But they spared me that ordeal. And I found out why. You see, the Shawnee, they love children real well. And my girl baby, just a day old in my arms, if I had died, I wouldn't have had to run a carrying her, of course. But if I had died, she wouldn't have had me to nurse off of. And so to spare my girl baby's life, they spared me that ordeal. And I was happy, of course. And I kept thinking, if I just did what they told me to do, I could keep my young'uns by my side. They took Georgie and Tommy from me straight away. Give them to live with another Indian family in a village about 50 miles away. And I found out what that was all about. You see, that family had lost 2 little boys to a fever contracted from white folk. So by the Indians' way of reckoning, white folk owed that family 2 little boys. And my boys was given to them, and I knowed I'd never see them again. And I knew my girl baby would be taken from me as soon as she was old enough to wean. I had to escape. But how was I going to do that? I weren't nothing more than a slave woman. That's why they captured us women, to do the slave work around the village. Oh, no, it is true. If I had chosen in my heart to become Indian, to become Shawnee, all I'd have to do is go to the river, take the sand from the river and rub it into my arm, signified I was rubbing out my white blood and putting in my red blood. And then I would go through the ritual, and it would be said that I would have a red heart from then on, be as if I had been born and bred Shawnee all my days. Well, many a black slave has escaped the plantations in the South and come up and gone through the ritual and become Shawnee, as if they had always been Shawnee all their lives. But I didn't want to be Shawnee. I had a home, and I had a husband, and I wanted to get back to him. So until I chose in my heart to have a red heart, why, I was nothing more than a slave woman. Kept eagle eye watch on every day. But I did get a chance to escape. I was sent with a hunting party, 5 days walk further west into Kentucky country. There's about a dozen braves or so going to put some food up for the wintertime, and me and another slave woman was sent. She was an older woman, couldn't rightly speak good English. She was from Deutschland or somewhere thereabouts. Anyway, me and this old Dutch woman, we was sent with the hunting party. They didn't keep no eye on us, thinking no way a white woman would escape this deep into the woods and such. So I told her we could escape. They weren't paying no mind to us at all, none whatsoever. So one day, she didn't want to go, mind you, but I talked to her. I said, together we could make it together if we had each other to help each other out. So one day we told them we was looking for nuts and berries, and we headed out on the south side of the Ohio River. Found out later they thought for certain a panther or a bear had gotten us. Couldn't imagine no white woman about to face the ordeal we was about to face. We just kept walking on the south side of the river. We walked for about 5 days, and we come to an old abandoned settler's cabin right directly across the river from that village we was held in all them months. And so we hunkered down and hid in the cabin. Why, there was some parched corn laid out in the fireplace, and we gathered it up into our aprons. And there was a horse standing outside the door, waiting for a master that weren't never going to come home. So that night, in the middle of the night, we headed off, following the river. My heart was clear to breaking. For I was leaving my girl baby in that village across the river. The Ohio, it's a mighty river, and I can't swim at all, no way to get over to her. And if I got there, they would just capture me all over again. But more than anything, I didn't believe she could face this ordeal I was about to face. It was already October by this time, and I know the weather was going to turn cold. And I didn't believe she could live through what I was about to face. And I planned I would come back and I would ransom for her freedom. But leaving my girl baby behind was the hardest thing I ever done in my life. We started following the river. We'd taken turns riding that horse so it wouldn't wear out. We'd come to a place where the little river comes into the bigger, and we'd have to walk sometimes 3 or 4 days to find a place for the horse to pick its way across, and we'd both clamber up upon it and get across the river. But one time, we was crossing a river, and that horse got its foot caught in a jam of logs. Well, it was whinnying and a neighing and a carrying on. And we knowed if any Indians were in the forest, they'd come and see what was making a ruckus and capture us all over again. We tried for the better part of an hour to get that horse's foot free, but we couldn't do it, so we had to leave it behind. Now he's on foot. Every time we come to a river coming in, we'd have to walk up sometimes 10 or 12 days before we could find a place to cross. Well, neither me nor that old woman could swim. And besides, if we got wet, 'tweren't no way to get dry. Oh, you dasn't light a fire. That would alert the Indians to where we was. We had no way to light a fire, no ways. So we had to stay as dry as we could because it was cold. After a while, we was walking every morning. There's frost on the ground, and our moccasins were plumb worn out. We were walking barefoot in the frost. Of a night, we'd holler out a hole in the ground and lay down in that hole together, pulling up dirt and sticks and leaves over us, trying to get some kind of a warmth going. And there weren't no food to be had. Well, you know what these woods is like in November. Why, nothing but a few old shriveled up pawpaws, a handful of walnuts, that corn we went through straight away. Well, after a while, we took to eating whatever we could find. Handfuls of dirt, pieces of bark, grub worms. Y'all want more details? The youngins, they like the details. You want more details? One time we found an old rotten deer carcass, tried to eat the brains, but was too plumb full of maggots, made us sick. That'll hold you to your next meal. Next time you eat some food, you be thinking about what I ate those times. Some days we were so sick we couldn't walk at all. We just lay there sick and wait out a day. That old woman, she went plumb out of her mind with hunger. She decided she was so hungry, she was going to eat me alive. I had to run and hide from her in the bushes. Well, I guessed I was due for some luck. For there in the very bush I chose to hide in was an old Indian canoe. Now I had me a choice. I could take that canoe and I could push it off into the river with all them white water and those waves are coming like they do. You know what I'm talking about? And me not knowing how to swim. Or I could face that crazy old woman. I chose the river. Pushed my canoe out into New River, got me a big old stick to get out into the middle of the current, and don't you know, about halfway across, my canoe plumb fell apart. It had been outside in the elements for so long, couldn't hold up in the water no more. So there I was, clinging to what was left of it, kicking my feet for all I was worth. Finally, I pulled myself up on the other side of the river, and I decided that I should die. Well, here it was November. I'd been walking for about a month with no food. My shoes was gone. My clothes were nothing but rags about me. And now I was drenched wet to the bone with no way of getting dry. And I said, "Dear Lord, I commend my spirit unto you." And I put my head down to die. Next morning, the sun woke me up, and I figured God was sending me a pretty strong message, so I'd better start walking again. That old woman was across the river hollering, "Mary, Mary, come back." But even if I wanted to get back to her, there weren't no way to get over there. My canoe done fell apart. So we walked along for a couple of days, hollering every now and again, waving. But pretty soon the river took a bend and she went her way. And I went mine. Now I thought the hardest part of my ordeal was behind us. But I was wrong. I came around a bend in that river, and there was a sheer mountain of rock straight up in the air. Water lapped up to the base of it. And the new river, it flows from south up north, so I couldn't jump in the river and let it current carry me past. I couldn't go back the way I come. I could only do one thing, and that was climb that mountain. So I started, hand over hand, straight up that mountain. Pretty soon the rocks were digging in my hands, in my feet, in my knees. And there was blood running down my arms and my legs. And I believe there were tears running down my face. I'd stop and rest where I could find me a ledge or something. And I'd keep climbing. The wind was whipping around that rock face. But finally, I made it to the top, and I collapsed. I thought, this is it. I can't go, not one step further. And then I looked around. I recognized where I was. I was not 10 miles from my home. I tried to get to my feet, but I was too weary. I couldn't do it. I fell down again. But I was not going to give up. This close to home, I started to crawl on my hands and my knees to make it that last bit of a way home. I didn't make it very far. I only crawled about 2 miles on my hands and knees before I give out altogether. I has made it as far as my neighbor's cornfield. His name was Adam Harmon, and I could see he was to home, for there was smoke curling out of his chimney, so I hollered, feeble as I was, "Adam? Adam Harmon, can you help me? Oh, Adam, it's me, it's Mary Ingalls." And I collapsed. Adam was home all right. He'd come out of his house with a gun in his hand. You see, Shawnee will do a thing like this. They use a captive as bait. Call you out of your house, and when you come out to help them, they take a shot at you. So just to be careful, he was going to take a shot at me. Now, wouldn't that been something? Walk over 500 miles in November and December with no food and no shoes and get shot by your neighbor not 10 miles from home. He didn't shoot me. Somehow he done recognize me. I don't know how he done it. Come out and scoop me up. I was nothing more than a bag of bones. Took me to that house and nursed me for 3 weeks on beef tea and cornbread. Had some kind of fool notion that beef broth was better for me than deep venison broth, so went out and killed his prize milk cow just to give me some beef broth. And then when I was well enough and had my strength back, we got on some horses and headed out to McCorkle's place there at Dunker's Bottom. We heard tell my husband and brother were there, but when we got there, they weren't there. So we had to wait for them. They had gone down south to the Cherokee, and that great chief Bostanaco, I hear tell, my husband told me later, was promising to try to help me escape or try to go take some ransom goods. But we had to wait for him. And do you know who come to that fort while I was there? That crazy old Dutch woman. She had found a settler's encampment that had been abruptly abandoned, and she found clothes and food and a horse and came riding in as big as life. Now, I do not believe that I shall ever forget the fact she tried to eat me alive. But we'd been through a lot more than that together, so I just fell on her neck, a-hugging her and happy to see her. But not as happy as I was to see my William. When William and John rode through them gates, I cried tears and tears and tears of joy. Now, William didn't feel right safe there at that fort because it weren't a proper fort made by soldiers. So we went over to Fort Voss there, one made by the soldiers, but I had me a bad feeling about that place. And I had my fill of living on the frontier anyways, so I made William take me straight away back to Bedford County. And do you know, that fort was attacked not a month later. And both of William's brothers were there, and they were killed. Had we been there, William would have been killed, and I would have been taken prisoner all over again. Oh, ladies, it is nothing to be captured 3 or 4 times in your life. Get ransomed for your freedom, get home to your people, turn around and get captured all over again. I just have to say, if I am ever captured a second time in my life, I'm going to stay put and wait for my family to come with the ransom goods. I don't believe I could make that walk a second time in my life. Well, we did come back to Draper's Meadow, to our home, and I did have 4 more children: Mary, Susan, Rhoda, and John. But I never stopped dreaming about my first 3 babies. We found out that Georgie died in captivity of a fever he contracted, and we never did find that girl baby. Looked high and low for her, no sign of her nowheres. But Tommy, now he come home to us 13 years later. Well, he didn't want to. Why, he was all Indian, and finally it was his Indian daddy told him that after once we'd found him and tried to reach out to him, his Indian daddy said he should come home and find out what his other people were all about. I shall never forget the day I saw him after all them years, looking all Indian. Couldn't speak English no more, wouldn't wear no white man's clothes. We had a time getting him to sit down at a table and use a knife and a fork and sleep in a bed. And some days he'd go off in the forest for 3 or 4 days at a time, and I'd think to myself, well, I guess I ain't never going to see him again. We had to find some way to civilize this boy. My husband had a friend back in Albemarle County, a Dr. Thomas Walker, and he had him another student, and he agreed to take our Tommy alongside that boy. And so we sent him there to Dr. Walker's house. What was that boy's name? Thomas Jefferson. That was his name. That's right. Oh, he did come home to us. Not Thomas Jefferson, to our boy Tommy, come home to us. He even marched with my husband and my brother under the leadership of General Andrew Lewis there to what's known as the Battle of Point Pleasant, the first battle of the American Revolution. But when he found out it was his Shawnee brothers, as he said, that he was a-fighting, he threw his gun down, wouldn't have no part of that battle, went once and for all to live with the Shawnee. But I knowed something would bring him back to me. He had met a girl in Albemarle County. Her name was Eleanor Grills, and so he come back to get married to her. But Mama, he says, it's getting too built up around here in Draper's Meadow. Got to walk near a half-mile to cut you a tree for firewood. So he moved his family on out to Kentucky country. And do you know what happened to him, happened to me, happened to my boy almost 25 years to the day? He was in the cornfield. Eleanor and 3 young'uns were in the house. Shawnee come in, led by that Shawnee chief Blackhoof, and take him all prisoner. Tommy got a posse to follow out behind him, said, be ever so quiet. If the Shawnee get wind they're being followed, first thing they'll do is kill the captives. Sure enough, Blackhoof figured it out, and he fell to tommyhawking them captives. All 3 of my grandbabies died that day. But Eleanor, now she's going to live, although they took 13 pieces of bone out of her head. Oh, Tommy and Eleanor ain't partial to living around here, but me, I have a hankering for it myself. I love Draper's Meadows now. We don't have no Indian trouble no more here. In fact, we had our own war with them redcoats. And do you know, my husband and my brother and my son and all of my son-in-laws were all officers in the Continental Army. And that young feller, that George Washington, well, he didn't turn out to be so bad now after all, did he? Made a right fine general. And now he's the president of our new nation, the United States of America. Oh, I don't pay much mind to it. I got my hands full. William and I own a tavern and a ferry here on New River, and William passed on a couple of years ago, so I have to do all the work myself. I'm a-living with my son John. He tells me I should write my story down, but you know, I never did learn to read or write much. I can do some simple cipherings to keep the tavern a-running, but I'm going to have to wait until John has some time to write my story for me, so folks like you will know what it was like to live out here on the western frontier of Virginia. Well, I got to say, you've been a right fine group of folk to talk to. So polite and attentive and such. Perhaps now you have some questions for me. Please keep in mind it is 1790, and you're dressed awful funny, but I'm too polite to mention anything about that. Any question you might have, and then perhaps we can come forward in time. Any question you might have? Yes?
Where in Kentucky did your son live?
Well, he lived, of course, it's hard for me to say because I don't know the places that you know today. But he lived just past Cincinnati, about 5 days walk past Cincinnati. Somebody else? Yes, in the back.
Explain your costume or your dress.
Well, I explain my clothing. I certainly will. I'm so glad that you asked. Now, you must understand, I am a woman of means. So I have 2 suits of clothing. This is my summer suit. It's made of linen. And I have a woolen suit. But if I didn't have the means for it, I'd only have 1 suit of clothing and it'd be all wool. And I'd wear it no matter what the time of year was. And let me tell you, that woolen stuff gets quite warm in July and August. So this is my summer suit. This is called a short gown. Now, I have the sleeves on it, which again indicates I'm a woman of means. Oh, the other thing I want to tell you all is that when you fashion your short gowns, your bodices here, ladies, you always tie the bodice at the bottom. The only people who tie the bodice at the top are women of ill repute. So, well, there's one exception. A nursing mother is permitted to tie her bodice at the top. But other than that, anybody else, if you tie your bodice at the top, you're sending a message you don't want to send. All right? So I'm just letting you know that right now. That's straight away. Of course, this is my apron is my most important tool that I have. Some people say an apron is to keep you clean. Never heard tell such nonsense in all my life. Your apron is your most important tool. It can fan a fire. It becomes pot holders. Can cover you while you're feeding a baby. You can gather up eggs and things in it. It is a tool that you need to have on the frontier. More important than keeping you clean, let me tell you that. Now, of a night, this is a chemise, and it goes all the way down to my knees. I'm not going to show you. But of a night, I would take off my skirt and my short gown and my apron, and this becomes my nightdress. And then the next day, I put it all back on. And I might wash it, once or twice a year, I expect. Do you know the Shawnee take a bath every single day? I don't think that's healthy. Well, we would never take a bath in the winter months. Oh, no. That's how you catch disease and get cold and such as that. Now, some folk way back on the frontier, we don't do this no more. We never got this drastic, I tell you. But they'll rub bar grease all over themselves and sew themselves into a winter suit about November and take it off in April. But most people do take their yearly bath in May, which is why a bride gets married in June. Makes sense, doesn't it? Just in case, a bride will always make sure she has flowers with her in case someone forgot to take their bath, she can smell the flowers instead of that person. But for the most part, you take a bath in May, just once a year or so. Now, also, I do have my chatelaine. Again, I'm a woman of means, so I need my, my scissors are gone. Well, what do you know? I have a key to lock the liquor cabinet and a clock to know what time to close the tavern up. And let's see, and my shoes? Well, I'm wearing leather shoes with buckles because, again, have I stressed enough that I'm a woman of means? Back when I was captured all them 40 years ago, I was wearing moccasins back in those days. We found out early on that shoe leather didn't hold up much on the frontier. But them Indians had a good idea with deerskin moccasins, so we used that idea. But they used our ideas, too. They liked this cotton cloth that we have. Most of what they wore before was simply leather or heavy blankets. And so this cotton cloth was real popular with them. But their women folk had no idea how to sew it. So my job when I was with the Indians was to sew the shirts, and the French traders would take the shirts around and sell them around the village. So there was a sharing of ideas of clothing that we wore. I think that covers it. Another question? Yes, sir, in the back. What became of my tavern? Well, my son and my daughter kept it going for a while, I suppose, after I passed on. I don't know what's going to happen to it after I pass on. I hope it stays open. We put a lot of work in that tavern. You know, we have our house on one side and the tavern or the river and the tavern on the other. And of a night we pull the ferry up to the house side so the scallywags in the tavern can't get over and bother us at our house. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You were talking about your son Tommy. And when he got married and then moved back, and then the Shawnee caught and killed your grandchildren. And how did Tommy feel about that? Having grown up with them, having lived with them, basically their brother, now he's kind of caught between two worlds. Was he resentful?
Let me just tell you, my Tommy was always caught between two worlds. He never rightly fit in with either world. And, you know, he did not fit in with us, and that's why he moved out and left out and went to Kentucky country, eventually moved to Louisiana territory. And 2 of my girls followed out behind him, and they've got families down there now. But Tommy never fit in. Tommy was never part of our world again. He tried real hard, and then he tried to be part of that world, and that's one side of your question. But the other side of your question is how does he feel about that? you must understand, we have a different sensibility than you all do. We lose children all the time. It ain't an unusual thing for us to lose children before the age of 5. And so you live with it in a different way than folk in your generation do. Does that make sense?
Let's give a big round of applause here. All right. Now, we haven't completely finished with questions, but at this point, it's going to be Karen and Doug, and you can ask a question from today or any period that you would like.
Come on up, Doug.
They also will tell you about the future.
Sure. Right. My name is Karen Veronch. This is my friend Doug Wood. We both happen to live in West Virginia, and we're happy to be here at Piqua. I've been to Piqua before. We're glad to be back. Sir, in the back.
You mentioned McCorkle's. Where were you in relation to, say, Charleston? Because I know there's a McCorkle Boulevard in the area.
Sure. It's an old... McCorkle's an old name in West Virginia, but we actually, where Mary was located was Radford, Virginia. Actually, her family home was Blacksburg. Her family home, the foundation, is the center of the quad at VPI, Virginia Polytechnic Institute, okay? Then William, and where she lived as a married woman, was on Radford, which is right on New River, about 10 miles away from there. So that's Virginia. They were in what is now Montgomery County, Virginia. At the time it was Augusta County, Virginia, but it's now Montgomery County, Virginia. And then she walked to probably, we think, what is now Portsmouth, but it might have been a little further north than that, and then she walked to Boone County, Kentucky, is where she walked with the Indian, with the 12 Braves, and there was a salt lick there, Big Bone Lick State Park it's called, because they were actually mastodon bones, but all the Lewis and Clark boys took those for treasure, so they aren't there anymore. So, yes?
You said your son eventually wrote your story as you gave it to him. Is he related to the Draper of the Draper papers?
I think they are distantly related. He's not the same Draper by any means. That was up in Wisconsin, and there is certainly a relation, but it's not her direct relation. Yes, sir.
Colonel Patton, why was he at Draper Meadow that day? Did he own some property there?
Oh, right. I might let Doug answer that question. Well, you know, there's lots and lots of conspiracy theories, and that's one thing you got to be careful of. You know, how do we know all these years later? Was he just visiting? Was he there recruiting men for battle? I mean, there's lots of reasons he might have been there, and he did not own land nearby. But there's lots of conspiracy theories of why he was there. We can't prove any of those. So, do you have any better answer than I have?
Just to say that he certainly was a primary mover and shaker in the region. The Drapers, the Ingalls, they probably wouldn't have been settled there if Patton hadn't done the legwork to have the area surveyed and so on and so forth, to find parcels that folks would be attracted to settle on anyway. He actually was a shipper at one time, and he was from Northern Ireland, like a lot of people who were coming over there. He actually had recruiters in Northern Ireland recruiting the Ulster Scots to have them come and settle in the region on the properties that he had surveyed. So he was a kind of a land speculator.
Right.
So he would have had, like Karen said, he would have had a number of reasons to be there to kind of keep an eye on his interests, his business interests.
Yes?
Question for Doug about the scalping.
Yeah.
We had always been led to believe that it was a Native American custom, but I read a few years ago that the French actually kind of initiated that.
It is an ancient American Indian custom, just like in some parts of Europe, cutting heads off and taking them, or cutting ears off and taking them was a custom. There's evidence from the Aztecan culture and Mayan culture that the taking of heads was a custom of theirs long before Columbus ever set foot in the West Indies. So it's certainly a homegrown custom, but it did change over time. Its reason for being changed over time. I'll tell you a little bit about that, try to make it short. First of all, I want you to understand, because a lot of people here don't know what that means, scalping. I wonder if one of my friends down here, maybe that fellow who ran for me, would you mind volunteering, coming up to stand here at the stage and face me? And I'm going to show you all where the scalp comes from. Now, every person has a place, what I grew up calling a cow lick. You know, if you live in an agricultural area, that's known as the cow lick, because it looks like a little swash of hair that mama cow licked the calf with. That's where the scalp is supposed to come from, and that's where the warrior's scalp lock is worn as a taunt to the enemy. You come and try to take my scalp. You sit down now, thank you. So that's where it comes from. Now, there's some anthropological evidence that it's because that special spot on the hair is considered a place where the soul can escape the body at death, or where information can come in from the spirit world. And that may be one of the reasons why the scalp was so important, and why the warrior wore his scalp there, and why taking the trophy of the scalp was so important. Now let's get down to what did it really mean for the cultures that did the scalping. Well, I'll give you a little Cherokee story, what happened in the French and Indian War, which shows the transition in the meaning of scalping. Walhatchee was an older Cherokee warrior who came to assist the colonists in 1757. He ended up in Maryland because Maryland was paying 50 pounds worth of goods for a scalp, an enemy Indian scalp, and Virginia was paying 10 and Pennsylvania was paying 5, so Maryland was the better deal. Now, his warriors take some scalps from near Fort Duquesne and bring them in, and they have a big ceremony with the representatives of the governor of Maryland, Governor Sharp, and it goes on for quite some time, and the speeches are made. And Walhatchee, if I'm going to boil it down to a couple of points, I'm going to boil it down to this. Walhatchee said, "We came to your aid because you didn't know how to fight, and we knew how to fight your enemy." See, quite frankly, the colonists hadn't all learned how to fight in Indian manner at that point. So we came to help you. We took scalps, and now we want you to give us the gifts you said that we could take back to our people for having served you in the war. And the governor's representatives made a speech, and they essentially said at the end of their speech, "And now if you will hand over the scalps, we will pay you for those scalps." And Walhatchee got really angry and upset and stormed out. And so a younger warrior hung around there, and the governor's men said, "Well, we can't give you this without taking the scalps back to prove that you did what we asked you to do. We can't pay you otherwise." And the younger warrior basically said, "Well, there's a problem with semantics here." So he goes and talks to Walhatchee. Walhatchee comes back. What offended Walhatchee is that they had essentially commodified the scalps. Yes, the scalps were proof that we defeated the enemy, but Walhatchee wanted to know, how am I going to prove to my people that I did their bidding and defeated their enemies if I leave you the scalps? He was pretty horrified about the idea that he had to turn over these trophies of war that were much more than trophies of war. They were proof to his nation that he had defeated the enemy. So what the young warrior did then was he convinced Walhatchee, if they worded it a little differently, and they let you get a document that says that you took the scalps, that you can take it back to their people, and the translators amongst us can, and he agreed to it. But that shows what happened by the Europeans paying for scalps is over time, by the end of the 18th century, young men are going to war, young warriors are going to war, and they're not even going home with their scalps and leaving them hanging in the village square to prove their bravery to their own people. They're immediately turning them in to their European allies, getting rum instead of gifts for the folks back home, getting drunk. It was a terrible thing to happen, but that's what happened to scalping. European influence caused scalping to go from an extremely important community ritual to simply a commodification to get some rum.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Sorry I took so much time.
Anything else?
Never argue with anybody that's armed.
I want to clarify something if I can. You know, the thing about Mary Ingalls, the story of her baby is actually a little bit controversial. Many historians do not acknowledge that she had the baby. There was a wonderful novel, Follow the River, that put the baby in it. And he, James Alexander Tom, who wrote it, did research with the natives. I mean, there's lots of pros and cons. Did she have the baby? Did she not have the baby? Some say that she was not pregnant and did not leave the baby behind. Other people say that she did have the baby and chose to leave it behind. And that is, I just want to be clear with you that is something a choice that I made as a scholar. One of my reasonings for thinking that she had the baby and left it behind was she was not forced to run the gauntlet. And that there's very few reasons, the only reason you would not run the gauntlet would be if it would harm the life of a child in some way. And so for that reason, I chose to put it in my monologue, but I wanted to just clarify that with people as a historian.
And since we're clearing up things, this fella asked about Ostenaco speaking English. He actually spoke very little English, but that English that he spoke, he did learn from the Scotch-Irish traders that were amongst his people. But Thomas Jefferson, you heard Tommy and Thomas had something in common with their tutor. Thomas Jefferson was a boy when this was all going on, the French and Indian War, and Thomas Jefferson heard Ostenaco speak on the eve of his departure to England in 1762 when Ostenaco was going to England. And Thomas Jefferson remembered that many years later when he wrote his History of Virginia, etc., etc. And he wrote about Ostenaco making a speech. He essentially said the fellow had this magnificent voice and his gesticulations and this and that, and I was spellbound, and I didn't understand a word he said. Because he was speaking to his own people who had accompanied him there in their native language.
There's a question over here.
How did the two of you decide to do these particular characters? Is there any familial connection, or did you just read something about them and get interested in them? Or?
Well, I think there's no familial connection for me for Mary Ingalls. I live in southern West Virginia, and my husband was a whitewater raft guide on New River, and he would tell the story and said, this is a great story, you should read the book, and I was mesmerized by her. And when our Humanities Council offered for characters to do History Live characters, I became really interested in her and just fascinated by her story, I think is what brought me to her. Doug?
With me, I had a mutual friend with Karen Dan Cutler, who was on the Humanities Council of West Virginia's roster as portraying Chief John Logan at the time. And he encouraged me to come on because they had no other American Indian historical characters on the council. And I pondered who to do. And I remembered reading about Ostenaco, barely just a few lines in a history book about Colonel Andrew, or Major, then Colonel, then General Andrew Lewis. And I thought, I know he was in West Virginia at one point, and I want to get a character who's somehow in West Virginia. Turns out in the 3 years that he campaigned for the British, he was in what is now West Virginia 3 years, and he was in Ohio at least one of those years, in southeastern Ohio. So, and I have Cherokee ancestry through great-great-great-grandmother, and her people came from Tennessee, and Ostenaco was from the Overhills towns in Tennessee. But that's a long shot, but there's a connection. But I was interested in understanding more about the 1750s era Cherokee people and why they did what they did to aid the British in the French and Indian War. So that kind of fascinated me. That's why I chose that character.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this evening.
We'll be here.
Karen, outstanding.
Thank you.